Ralph McGill was a longtime editor and publisher of the Atlanta Constitution. From June 1938 until his death in February 1969, McGill wrote more than 10,000 columns. But they weren't just any columns. McGill wrote courageously in the face of tremendous opposition and looming threats of violence to summon our better angels. Time and time again, he wrote against segregation and the failure of separate but equal. He was a champion of civil rights at a Southern paper in a Southern city at a time when most of the South wasn't willing to go nearly as far. In a period of Southern history punctuated by bigotry, xenophobia, and intolerance, McGill spoke with clear voice, with courage, against the dark forces battling for the soul of this region. The horrific synagogue shooting this past month sent me looking for one of McGill's most famous columns, written in the aftermath of the bombing of the Atlanta Jewish Temple in 1958. I thought it was important that particularly you students, but everyone, revisited this. So with apologies, I'm going to read the entire column. It's not terribly long, I promise, but it's important that we hear it, I think. Here's what he wrote. Dynamite in great quantity Sunday ripped a beautiful temple of worship in Atlanta. It followed hard on the heels of a like destruction of a handsome high school in Clinton, Tennessee. The same rabid, mad dog minds were, without question, behind both. They also are the source of previous bombings in Florida, Alabama, and South Carolina. The schoolhouse and the church are the targets of diseased, hate-filled minds. Let us face the facts. This is a harvest. It is the crop of things sown. It is the harvest of defiance of courts and the encouragement of citizens to defy law on the part of many Southern politicians. It will be the acme of irony, for example, if any of 4 or 5 Southern governors deploring the bombing. It will be grimly humorous if certain state attorneys general issue statements of regret. And it will be quite a job for some editors, columnists, and commentators who have been saying that our courts have no jurisdiction and that the people should refuse to accept their authority now to deplore. It is not possible to preach lawlessness and restrict it. To be sure, none said, go bomb a Jewish temple or a school. But let it be understood that when leadership in high places in any degree fails to support constituted authority, it opens the gate to all those who wish to take the law into their own hands. There will be, to be sure, the customary act of the careful drawing aside of skirts on the part of those in high places. How awful, they will exclaim. How terrible. Something must be done. But the record stands. The extremists of the citizens' councils, the political leaders who in terms violent and inflammatory have repudiated their oaths and stood against due process of law, have helped unloose this flood of hate and bombing. This too is a harvest of those so-called Christian ministers who have chosen to preach hate instead of compassion. Let them now find pious words and raise their hands in deploring the bombing of a synagogue. You do not preach and encourage hatred for the Negro and hope to restrict it to that field. It is an old, old story. It is one repeated over and over again in history. When the wolves of hate are loosed on one people, then no one is safe. Hate and lawlessness by those who lead release the yellow rats and encourage the crazed and neurotic who print and distribute the hate pamphlets, who shriek that Franklin Roosevelt was a Jew, who denounced the Supreme Court as being communist and controlled by Jewish influences. The series of bombings is the harvest, too, of something else. One of those connected with the bombing telephoned a news service early Sunday morning to say the job would be done. It was to be committed, he said, by the Confederate underground. The Confederacy and the men who led it are revered by millions. Its leaders returned to the Union and urged that the future be committed to building a stronger America. This was particularly true of General Robert E. Lee. Time after time, he urged his students at Washington University to forget the war between the states and to help build a greater and stronger Union. But for too many years now, we have seen the Confederate flag and the emotions of that great war become the property of men not fit to tie the shoes of those who fought for it. Some of these have been merely childish and immature. Others have perverted and commercialized the flag. For a long time now, it's been needful for all Americans to stand up and be counted on the side of law and the due process of law, even when to do so goes against personal beliefs and emotions. It is late, but there's yet time. That, ladies and gentlemen, is journalistic courage. Against that great backdrop, let me welcome our esteemed speaker today. Sometimes in my line of work, you just know. Many years ago, longer than either of us care to admit, Marina Guevara, a young Argentinian grad student whose work I admired in our newsroom, swung by my office to talk about her master's degree project. Within seconds, I was on board. You see, Marina had been doing some research on a lead mining company, Herculaneum, that had been in the news in Missouri for a series of environmental disasters when she came across, I think, a single mention somewhere in an annual report of a similar mining operation in a tiny Peruvian town. "I want to go," she said. She did, and the story, which detailed a Peruvian company town owned and controlled by Herculaneum, destroyed by lead, children so stunted they looked half their age, disabilities, deformities. Well, she pitched that story to the Miami Herald. It ran, and from there, more than 40 national and international journalism awards later, including the Pulitzer Prize for Explanatory Reporting, I'd say Marina has made us all proud. Marina serves as Deputy Director of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Over a 20-year career, she has investigated environmental degradation, corruption on a global scale, the illicit tobacco trade, offshore money laundering, some of the most complex and Byzantine forms of corruption on the planet. She's also managed some of journalism's most consequential investigations on global corruption, including the Panama Papers, which involved more than 370 reporters in 76 countries and shook governments and businesses across the world. Today, she's a John S. Knight Fellow at Stanford University who was kind enough to get on a red eye and fly here this morning to come and share with us her model for collaborative investigative reporting. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome, as part of the University of Georgia's signature lecture series, our 40th annual McGill Lecture, Marina Guevara.
Okay, let's get rid of the lone wolves first. Okay, there we go. That's my first slide. Thank you so much for being here. I have a cold, so bear with me and my voice will soldier through. It is really an honor to be here. Thank you, Charles, for inviting me. Thank you, Diane. And it's an honor to be thinking today about Ralph McGill, a true journalism hero, somebody who lived by that ideal of comforting those most vulnerable people in our society, while at the same time making the powerful extremely uncomfortable. I think if he was alive today, he would be incredibly busy, like we all are. He would be writing about immigration. He would be writing about rising inequality. He would be writing about sexual abuse in the workplace. He would be writing about the responsible way in which we are handling global warming. And unfortunately, he would still be writing about structural racism in America. He would also be outraged. He would be outraged to see that state men and women are being replaced by strong men in countries from Brazil to the Philippines to Hungary. He would be outraged to know that in 2017, we again hit another record for jailed journalists worldwide, with Turkey and China and Egypt leading that sad statistic. He would be even more outraged to know that his country, the US, after the Capital Gazette shooting, has become, in 2018, one of the most dangerous places on earth for journalists to work, comparable only to countries like Afghanistan. And that's not even mentioning the disinformation campaigns that millions of people in our country trust more than they trust their local newspaper or public radio station. So we could spend a lot of time talking about this sad state of the world and our country and the many challenges facing journalism. Or we can talk about the opportunities that this complex situation presents us. So that's what I want to do. I bring great news from around the world, and I want to tell you how journalists from South Africa to the United States, from South Korea to Chile, and China are reinventing their profession so that with new tools and with a new mindset, they can face the challenges that we as a society face today. So we're going to remember a little bit, and we're talking about investigative journalism here. Who investigative journalists are, right? So we are loners. We hoard information. We like to scoop others. We want the scoop. We need the scoop. We are that journalist in the corner of the newsroom that the editors often wonder, what is he or she doing? And that model, and sorry that this does the image is a little dark, that model may have worked well. This is the parking garage. This is Watergate. So at the time where one or two journalists were meeting with sources in the parking garage, that model of the lone wolf may have worked very well. It still works. These meetings still take place. But more and more information is reaching us in formats like this. This is a real leak of information that arrived to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists in 2012. And if you can see the number of the folders, so that's the number of folders that we had. Each folder had 15 levels of subfolders. And this was a huge and messy and big dump of information that revealed the secrets of some of the most powerful companies and people and politicians around the world. It was the first of a series of disclosures about the offshore world that culminated with the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. So when we opened those, when we finally managed to open that kind of hard drive and that complexity, we find this. This is the kind of a story that we're facing today. This is just a fraction of the global network of the law firm Mossack Fonseca from Panama, the law firm at the heart of the Panama Papers, a law firm that was serving all these powerful people so they could hide their business offshore. So can this lone wolf mentality, or can this journalist in isolation tackle a story this complex and this global? And the answer is probably not. So 20 years ago, ICIJ was created precisely to bring together the lone wolves of the world. They were all working on similar stories. They were all investigating similar acts of corruption, the same companies, the same individuals, but they were all doing it on their own. So the idea was to bring them together and to give them the tools and to help them trust one another, that thing that is not in our DNA. We don't trust anybody, right? We don't even trust our colleagues. And so this was very disruptive 20 years ago. And we didn't do it just out of the goodness of our heart. It was done for the sake of the story. Because sometimes the only way to do justice to a story is to collaborate and to share radically across borders. Like in trapeze, the most selfish thing you can do is to trust others and to collaborate. Otherwise, you'll fall. The same happens with collaborative journalism. It's the most selfish form of journalism because alone we cannot face the kind of stories that we are doing these days. So let's think a little bit more about investigative journalism. Sometimes, very often, investigative journalists focus on big fish, right? We go after the super villain. And that is really important, the kingpin, right? There's a super villain. We need that. That has a lot of impact. It provides a big example to others. It's a good place to start, but it's not enough. Investigative journalism is at its best when we focus on systems, what I call the infrastructure of corruption. When we focus on the infrastructure of corruption, how it comes about, who are the enablers, and how it is allowed to continue to exist despite all the damage that it causes, that's when we can really have permanent and deep impact in our society. And I love this image of the New York Times showing the 201 powerful men who lost their jobs because of the Me Too revelations, and how half of their replacements, nearly half of the replacements, were women. When we focus on a system, when we stay with a story, when we share radically the way that the New York Times was sharing with the New Yorker, and was, they were like sharing practices among the journalists that were coming onto the story. It started with the New York Times and the New Yorkers, and then it expanded all over the country and all over the world. And that's when it became systemic, and that's when it had this kind of impact. I love to show what one of my colleagues in South Africa sent me an email recently. We were wondering in one of our moments of despair about why we do what we do. And she said it in a better way than I could have ever said it. Our stories may not individually change the world, although some do, but putting what happened on the record to be reckoned with, built on, and maybe used later to spark change, that's more than a job. It's holding up a mirror to the society we live in and contrasting it with the kind of society in which we want to live. So we need to recognize that there are some stories that, to do this kind of investigative reporting and to really go after the systems, the corrupt systems in our society, it requires a lot of humility too. And it's a humility to recognize that some of the stories really transcend us. And this was an example of ProPublica and BuzzFeed and Univision recognizing that the story of the missing children, immigrant children, was a story that none of them had the power to pursue on their own, that they needed to join forces with the Spanish-speaking network and with the other two organizations to be able to tackle together. So this is the new landscape. This is the new ecosystem. There's a change in paradigm in investigative reporting, which is really exciting because it's a change for the good. And we're going to see what that means. I'm going to open my water. So in the lone wolf model that we discussed before, we said that the goal was to scoop others, right? In collaborative journalism, of course, is to collaborate and share radically. There's individual achievement pursued by the lone wolf. Shared ownership is what we aspire to in collaborative journalism. There's a star treatment, and I'm sorry, there's no special treatment in these collaborations. And they are great equalizers. It's really beautiful to see that when this collaboration happens, the smallest, tiniest, digital outlet in Africa or the Middle East has the same access, the same information, and the same respect as their colleagues that are working side by side with their colleagues at the BBC or the Guardian or the New York Times. It's very proprietary, the work of the lone wolf. It depends on the resources of a particular media organization, resources that are shrinking. There's a lot of open source work at when we do these collaborations. All of the software that we use is open source. We aspire to national impact, usually, with the lone wolf model. In the collaborative journalism, we go for the world. We can aspire to have global impact and to affect systems at that level. It's very expensive to be a lone wolf. You have to pay for everything, and you have to hope that you get the resources. It's very efficient to share resources across a network and to leverage resources. We don't all need to pay for the same thing. Finally, you become a very easy target when you are a lone wolf. They can really take you down very easy. The network of journalists working together protects. So those are the advantages of this new and exciting paradigm that we're experiencing. And with that, I want to introduce you to my colleagues, Frederic Obermeyer and Bastian Obermeyer. They are not related, but they often dress the same. They work in the same newsroom. They share everything, and we call them the Overmeyer brothers. And the Overmeyer brothers had been doing what a lot of good journalists do, which is they had been staying with a story. For many years, they had been working with ICIJ on this story about offshore tax havens, and they have been signaling that they were willing to stay with that story. why had they been working on this story, and why is this story relevant, and how does it affect you? Tax havens are spaces of secrecy, are spaces where the powerful in our society can basically play by their own rules. In these spaces, they can, for example, create a company presenting almost no documentation. They can rent a person. They can go and rent an individual to appear as the owner, as the alleged owner of the company. So they hide behind this person that they rent. And of course, these are usually zero tax jurisdictions. It can be a Caribbean island, or it can be the state of Wyoming, it can be Delaware. Tax havens are all around us. And these are pockets of privilege and pockets of secrecy that we all don't have access to. But the very rich in our society do. So if you're asking, how does this relate to me? In this image, I would ask you to look at the dad with the son. That's you, and that's me. We are the fools that pay taxes. We are the fools that play by the rules. And we live in this society in which we have decided that it's going to be legal, that this kind of inequality takes place. So that's why this story was so important. In the US, just to remind you a little bit more about what I mean by inequality, the 0.1% of the wealthiest population owns more wealth than the 90% combined at the bottom. That's how stark it is. And if that doesn't outrage you enough, then I can show you, from our research, we did graphic novels following specific victims of the offshore world, and found, for example, that due to that secrecy of tax havens, the Syrian regime was able to get the fuel they needed for their airplanes to surpass or avoid sanctions, and get the fuel they needed to then bomb their citizens and kill thousands of them. In Russia, businessmen were able to hide the crimes, and their crimes were to rape orphans. The orphans were shipped from an orphanage to their hotels, and they were being raped. And this is all structured, and this is all hidden through these webs of companies in tax havens. That's why this story matters, and that's why we should care about them. So this is why Bastian and Frederic were so interested when one day, 2 years ago, this message comes through an encrypted system that they use. Are you interested in data? This is John Doe. John Doe is a fictitious name. It's the name of the source. To this day, we don't know the source. We don't know if the source is John Doe, or if it is Jane Doe, or if it is multiple people. It has stayed unknown and anonymous, and we are very glad about that. So the second thing was how much, of course, the journalist is like, how much data are we talking about? And John Doe says, more than anything you have ever seen. What are the conditions? My life is in danger. We will only chat over encrypted files, and there would not be meetings ever. And he or she was very adamant about that. We did try to meet a lot of times, and the response was always no. Why you are doing this, right? We want to know what motivates these sources, what motivates these sources to take the risk and to do this. I want to make these crimes public. So what the source then does is proceeds to deliver the biggest leak yet, that financial leak that journalists had ever received. It was 11.5 million records. And this is how we felt when we were told that this was on its way. The first batch of documents, it was just 3 million documents. And we made a quick calculation. The way we were working, we were set up in our newsroom, it would take us 1 year to process each file. And we are talking about a messy, like I showed you before, audios and video and photos and all kinds of formats, basically the entire documentation of a law firm for the duration of 40 years, dealing with everything from President Putin to the richest families in America. So we had to reinvent ourselves. We had a problem of size and a problem of technology. And so we first solved the technological problem. And what we did is we deployed virtual machines. And we were able to do this because our staff, at that time, almost half of our staff was composed of engineers and data analysts. So this is the newsrooms of the present and the future. If we had been all the school journalists, writing long-form stories, we would still be sitting looking at those files trying to open them. But because we had Matt and we had Rigo and we had all these great engineers who could be making so much more money elsewhere, but they said, oh, we want to change the world. We are journalists. So they deployed these machines virtually, and we were able to reduce that time to 11 days. And that's how we basically were able to create this supply chain of data where we transformed the messy information into something that could be shared radically with journalists around the world. That was a very important decision we made. So we could have decided, oh, we are so scared. This is so, oh my God, we're seeing presidents and prime ministers, probably intelligence services are here. Let's just hoard this whole thing, protect it really tightly, and maybe invite some media organizations who can travel to us and come and look at the documents in our office. That would have been kind of like the conservative and understandable thing to do. What we decided to do is we realized that if this data was pointing to 200 countries around the world, the only way to do justice to the story and to reveal that global truth was to recruit as many journalists as possible from as many backgrounds as possible from all corners of the world, because corruption is always local first. To be able to construct the global truth, first we needed to go to the journalists in Kazakhstan and in Russia and in Indonesia and in Argentina. And so we created a platform, and at the end of the process, the journalists were able, anywhere in the world, they were able, from their computer, to connect and to share and to do their searches. In this case, for example, Joaquin Guzman Loera, the Chapo Guzman in Mexico, and download the documents in their computers. So this was like the radical sharing phase, like the technology part. And then, of course, we also created somebody that we call the Facebook, when Facebook wasn't as bad a word as it is today. We call it the Facebook of investigative journalism. It was a platform where once you're doing your research, you immediately share the findings with your virtual newsroom. So we were all connected through this space, sharing findings as we were looking into these documents. The next super important decision was who we work with. And we were lucky in this respect that we've been working as a network for a while. And so we had people we trusted that we could go to. But in many other countries, we didn't have people. And so we had to create those new relationships and bonds. Yes, we brought the journalists that were most qualified and the journalists that had the track record, but we also realized we needed to have a much more holistic view of who we work with in an investigation this sensitive and with a model of collaboration. So when we are creating these networks these days, we're not just looking at how amazingly you write, how many followers you have on Twitter, how many investigative stories you've done, whether you have a brand or not. I'm looking at this. I'm looking at your commitment to journalism and to your peers. I'm looking at your self-awareness, what you can and cannot do. I'm looking at how you work in a group. I'm looking at your ability to communicate with your peers. So those have become crucial skills for journalists to be part of these global collaborations. And then we just, we don't call them rules. We said we have a few principles. People ask us, how do you all get, how do you agree on what you're going to do? How can this work? And so we just have a few principles, and we all live by those principles. And so we are united by something that is bigger than any of us. And that is a beautiful thing, and that is something that journalists often don't get to experience. So something that transcends the politics of your newsroom, the politics of your country, something that transcends also your ego. We share radically. Everybody, when they were doing their searches, immediately when they found information relevant, had to immediately share on our platform. We protect the confidentiality of data and sources, and that's why it was so great that John Doe never revealed his or her own identity. And had he or she revealed it to the German partners, they would not have shared it with the rest of the network, right? Because that would have been pretty much a disaster. We honor our embargoes. We all publish together at the same time, so we're not scooping one another. We're all agreeing on, on a date and a time when the information is ready, and for major impact, we publish all together. We credit one another fairly, of course. We respect everyone's independence, editorial independence. We're not trying to control what our Indonesian partners are going to write or what the other newspaper is going to say. So we share radically in the reporting and the research process, but then at the time of the writing and publication, everybody had their own independence, editorial independence, and also we all take responsibility for our own work. Nobody can be legally responsible for somebody else. So that's the way that we figured out this huge collaboration of journalists can work out. So at the end of the day, as Charles said, we were more than 109 media organizations working on this one story, 376 journalists from 80 countries. And you can see the variety of mainstream and investigative centers and small gutsy outlets in places like Tunisia and Botswana. Some of the stories that came through these investigations, one of the central ones was about Putin's fortune and how he had used people in his entourage to shuffle basically $2 billion around the world. This was the first time that we were able to document the kleptocracy in Russia with that level of detail. Putin said that this story was very accurate, but the part that the journalists missed, he said the money is right. The part that the journalists missed is that money was being spent on musical instruments for the St. Petersburg Orchestra, because the person that was at the center of the transactions was his best friend, who is a cellist at the orchestra. We had so many politicians in this data set that we had to create a special application and a special visualization so people in different languages, like in Spanish, can go and see their presidents and prime ministers and Supreme Court justices. We also wrote stories about sanctions, like I told you before, and how through this secret world, companies and individuals around the world had been able to avoid sanctions, to fund terrorism, and to traffic drugs, among other crimes. A year after Panama Papers, we got another leak, and that was called the Paradise Papers. And I just wanted to, just show a couple of stories because the Paradise Papers then continued to add to the disclosures. This time with the multinational companies like Apple and Facebook and others, showing how they also were part of these schemes. And then, of course, the people around President Trump, about 13 of his cabinet members, associates, and donors had also been part of the offshore world and used it. So what we learned by doing this kind of crazy work, well, the first lesson we learned is that sometimes when we do these investigations, some of the structures we're looking into are actually legal. And that should not stop us. That should encourage us. The question that we're asking is not whether something is legal, but whether something is moral. And I think if McGill was here, he would agree with that. What he was denouncing at his time were structures of racism and segregation that at the time were legal, right? But that didn't make them moral. They were outrageous, and that's what he wrote about. So let's not get fooled. Sometimes it's very easy in newsrooms to dismiss stories because they are not well. But what is the illegal thing here? Go after those difficult stories, those legal systems or legalized forms of corruption. That's what President Obama said when the Panama Papers were published. Many of the structures are legal, and that is exactly the problem. The next lesson we learned is about inequality. John Doe, the source of the Panama Papers, wrote a beautiful manifesto that you can find in the internet if you just Google John Doe manifesto. And the opening line is, income inequality is one of the defining issues of our time. It affects all of us the world over. And this story showed us that inequality is at the root of inequality is this system of secrecy and this system of that creates these pockets of privilege. And it also showed us that it's not the right and it's not the left. That that both the right and the left, Democrats and Republicans, are both at that high level. They are very united. They are equally exploiting these financial instruments that keep them in positions of privilege. And that's why in the Paradise Papers we had both Wilbur Ross, one of the richest individuals in our country, and our Secretary of Commerce. And we also had, with even more money in tax havens, James, I don't forget his name, James Simons, who is one of the biggest Democratic donors, the founder of Renaissance Technologies. James Simons had a trust in Bermuda with $7.2 billion in it. So we're not talking like hundreds or tens, we're talking $7.2 billion. That trust, which is now a foundation, is projected to be $35 billion in 2030. So that's the kind of money. And it can be very overwhelming and very disappointing for us to see. Even people who are progressive are exploiting the system and are finding ways to justify it, saying, well, it's legal. What we can see as journalists is that it presents us with the opportunity to show our readers, to reach readers, and to show them that it's not Democrats, it's not Republican. We can bridge that divide that is so obvious today in our society and tell them there are deeper structural issues here at play, and you are the victim. Help readers that feel disenfranchised, that feel invisible, recognize themselves in the stories as victims. Well, I forgot that. Yes, Queen Elizabeth and Bono were also part of these disclosures. Recognize themselves as the victims, like this French reader who wrote us after we published, saying, I'm a little French woman and I must live with just 450 euros per month, and it's very hard. Thank you very much for saying out loud what everyone else is thinking. For 100 years, tax havens had existed, and nobody, we had been chipping at them because of the secrecy. People can go to jail in these tax havens if they are found releasing information about who owns a company. So of course, nobody was releasing that information until very recently when this started happening. So for 100 years, nobody was challenging that system. And suddenly this starts happening. Suddenly something starts clicking, and people not only recognize themselves as victims, but also as potential agents of change. That's when investigative journalism really works. When, through staying with the story and pointing at the systems, we can create something like this. And this happened, like people went out in the squares in Reykjavik and in Buenos Aires and in London, and they said, enough. My kids are having a hard time finding a job. I pay taxes. The schools are not good. Oh, I get it now. I get it why this is happening. Okay, another lesson we learned, that our foundations remain unaltered. So people ask us, so with all these new technologies and all these new forms of collaboration, so what should I focus on? What is the new thing I should focus on? And we say, focus on the foundations, on the same things that Ralph McGill focused on being and staying independent, including independent from the corporations that you work for. And if you have to leave a job, you leave a job. like a lot of people in the Panama Papers, had to leave their jobs in order to be able to publish, because their corporations were part of the Panama Papers. Being there, so being and going to the places where the story is taking place, and not being trapped behind our computers like we see these days happening a lot. Verification, I cannot stress it enough. In times of fake news and disinformation campaigns, we have a huge responsibility to be super rigorous and transparent with our readers. Our readers, if we are not rigorous and transparent, they are going to leave us. And they are going to go and trust things that are completely outrageous. Protect our sources and protect our colleagues, this new journalistic solidarity. I wish we could have seen more yesterday when President Trump mistreated two reporters, and later we saw that one of the reporters had lost the credentials. I wish that the entire press corps had stood up and left. Or I wish they wouldn't have shown up today because one of the colleagues had been banned in a completely irrational way. So are we doing enough to protect our colleagues? Are we doing enough to stand up to these new, these rules that are not the normal rules? And finally, of course, tell a great story that people want to read and that can click with them. But also, yes, the new things, engage your audience from the beginning. We can't work like the lone wolf in isolation and then dump 10,000 words in our readers. So how are we working with them so they feel part of the process? And that is part of regaining that trust that we feel that in some cases we have lost, or that they have lost in journalism. Wrestle with data, know data. You don't need to be a coder, but you either need to have a coder in your, you need two things. You need to have a coder in your newsroom, and you need to be able to talk to that coder and tell and direct the work so it can end up with like great journalism meaning. Share and collaborate, of course, and think in impact from day one. We have been timid investigative journalists thinking, well, we should hope for impact, but don't talk too much about it because we might look like activists. And that's not the world we're living today. We need to, of course, never cross that line of activism, but always think about impact. We don't do these stories for some sort of like vanity. My boss calls them vanity stories, stories that are done for the sake of them and that in the end change nothing. So what is this story going to change? Or everything is going to stay the same? And then another lesson that we were reminded of with this story is there are consequences for the work we do. There were consequences for the BBC and for The Guardian, who were sued over the stories that they published, and they had to fight. And the lawsuit was not a libel lawsuit. It's not that they had made mistakes. The lawsuit was to compel them to give all the documents that they had based their investigations on, so they could go, the law firms could go after the sources. They stayed strong, they didn't disclose, and finally the lawsuit went away. Not so much for our colleague in Turkey, who's still fighting the lawsuits that are being brought by the family of the Prime Minister and by the former Prime Minister. So there are consequences for what we do. There are even worse consequences for people like Daphne Caruana Galicia. Have you heard of her? Do you know who I'm talking about? So Daphne is a Maltese reporter, and she is the mother of one of these coders and engineers at ICIJ. He's the guy who created these platforms that allow us to share radically with journalists around the world. His mom also was a journalist, and she was kind of like a lone wolf, but she was like an amazing and relentless, female journalist in this very corrupt country, denouncing all forms of corruption. And when the Panama Papers comes out and kind of confirms a lot of what she was saying, she continues and kind of like rides that wave and continues, again, as almost like a lone voice denouncing corruption until almost like a year ago, her car exploded and she was inside that car. So she may have been a lone wolf, but she wasn't alone. And she wasn't alone because these journalists had been working together. They had found strength in the pack. And this journalist, when she was killed, went back to Malta and started doing the stories that she hadn't finished. That's called the Daphne Project, and that is an image of the reporters who got together in France and said, we are going to continue the work of Daphne. You can kill a journalist, but not the stories, because we're a network, because you can't take down all of us. The Daphne Project continues. It has great consequences. Just this week, one of the Pilatus Bank, which is a bank that Daphne had been denouncing for years as the place where a lot of the Maltese officials were processing or allegedly processing their corrupt payments, just lost its license to operate in the European Union, which is a big step forward. So these are the consequences of that systemic and in-depth and collaborative journalism. Those people who went out in the streets in Reykjavik, they brought down their prime minister in a place like Iceland. 2 days in the streets, and he had to resign. The standards, suddenly, after 100 years, the standards had changed. It took a year in Pakistan to bring down the prime minister, but he had to resign again for having undisclosed assets in London. This more systemic change, the UK announced just a few months ago that they will require tax havens to start keeping basically public registries of who owns a company there. So what this does, if it comes to fruition, it ends secrecy in those jurisdictions. There's going to be much pushback and lobbying, I'm sure, but it's a great kind of systemic impact and step forward. And then, of course, you remember this image, and this image is going to only continue to grow as the Me Too stories continue to come out. So I want to finish with one of the, with John Doe, and honor him or her for his courage and her courage. And he tells us, we live in a time of inexpensive, limitless digital storage and fast internet connections that transcend national boundaries. It doesn't take much to connect the dots from start to finish, inception to global media distribution. The next revolution will be digitized, or perhaps it has already begun. Thank you so much. Of course.
We have a few budding journalists or working journalists in the room, so. Any questions?
You mentioned some of the successes that have been a result of your work. Also, Wilbur Ross, obviously kind of a failure. How do you see where we are now, and is there still, obviously this story is far from being over. Where do you see it going from here in terms of actual changes, other than what you've mentioned in your talk right here?
We have seen a lot of progress, but in countries like the United States, for example, it has been quite underwhelming. And I think that in this time and with the kind of administration that we have today, it's going to be even more difficult to see changes. When we published Gary Cohn, who was President Trump's economic advisor at the time and who appeared in the Paradise Papers, his response to the disclosures and to his own presence and his own name being in of these documents was, there is no news here, this is how the world works. So we are now at a time when there's a normalization of these forms of legalized corruption, where there's a celebration of business at all costs. We saw a story just last week saying that, showing how the Department of Justice has basically the prosecutions or fines to companies and businesses for various crimes have gone steadily down in the past 2 years. So I think that it's going to be hard to see a lot of progress of change in this country. Europe, we'll see. Europe has its own problems. They've been more forceful about wanting to outlaw some of these pockets of secrecy and tax havens, and we'll see if there's progress there. But yeah, I agree with you. It depends also if we stay with the story. If the consortium stays with the story, but it's also if other media stays with the story. We saw the story that the New York Times published a few weeks ago about President Trump's tax avoidance or perhaps even tax evasion strategies. And it was an incredible story, super well done, super detailed, and basically was picked up by very few media organizations in the US. Again, talking about that journalistic solidarity and talking about the need for radical sharing. So they published that story. It was a crucial story, it was a very important story, and it kind of died off. And we're hoping that prosecutors in New York are looking into it, and maybe there will be results. Yes?
Was there a moment in this process when this radical collaboration, radical sharing caused problems? Were there moments when it didn't work?
Among ourselves, among the journalists, we had rocky moments. We've been learning through the years. We have been doing. That was our advantage that we have been practicing before. It didn't work a few years ago when we were putting these groups together based only on who was a star journalist, who was the best journalist in each country, and that didn't work because they were all for themselves. So when we changed the model and we started looking much more broadly, bringing journalists from all different kinds of countries, but also looking at the full person, who wants to really collaborate, who wants to be part of something bigger than themselves, then it started to work out much better. There were moments of anxiety. News was breaking. The FIFA indictments in the soccer world were breaking, and we had a lot of information in the Panama Papers, and so the journalists were like, my colleagues are writing those stories sitting by me, and here I have a trove of information, and I can't do anything. Can we break the embargo? So they were pushed normal, attempts to can we break, can we go now? And it was really important, to basically hold everybody back and say, you have a story that nobody has. You don't have to be like everybody else. Just let's do the deep, the in-depth work. Let's get the real stories that matter. Let's wait for everybody to be ready, and then we're going to have, let's make a real big wave afterwards. So it's all kind of like this kind of coaching the collaboration. The collaborations don't just happen if there are no people that are constantly corralling and herding the forces, and the soldiers. It doesn't happen. And in that sense, I would like to encourage also the students here today to start thinking in terms of networks. You already have a network, and it's the network of your own colleagues here. I hope you will, when you finish here your studies, you will go on and you will always help one another, and you will share documents, and you will share stories, and you will instill in your newsrooms this new mentality of collaboration. And you will realize that there's no story that can be done just within national boundaries, but that you have to collaborate also internationally with other journalists worldwide. That your stories are going to be much more powerful and much more impactful because of that.
Join me in thanking Marina for being with us.